Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Walden's special Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month event, Uplifting Asian and Pacific Islander Voices. Our panelists and I will discuss the importance of celebrating Asian and Pacific Islander cultures, stories, and voices. We will also discuss the rise in racism and xenophobia toward Asian communities and how we can come together to stop Asian hate. Our first panelist is Dr. Makoto Ikegami, a 2019 Walden Doctor of Social Work graduate. He is a licensed clinical social worker and an ASL therapist for Caring Works residential facility, Hope House. Our second panelist is Dr. David Doan, a 2017 Walden PhD in Health Services graduate. He is currently serving as a management consulting senior manager at Accenture North America. Our third panelist is Dr. Ulysses Labilles, a 2017 Walden PhD in Public Health graduate. He is currently working as a COVID-19 core tribal nation epidemiologist for the CDC Foundation. Thank you to all of our panelists for joining tonight. Coming from an Asian family, formalities are very important, so I wanted to let the audience know that I had a chance to speak with all the panelists beforehand, and they prefer that I call them by their first names. I also want to remind everyone at the end of the panel, we'll take questions from our audience, so feel free to post your questions in real time in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. So I thought I'd kick off tonight's discussion with some quick, interesting facts about the Asian community. Asians are the fastest growing racial or ethnic group in the US, with more than 23 million people, making up about 7% of the nation's overall population. The US Asian population is also incredibly diverse, with roots from more than 20 countries in Asia. Api Heritage Month covers so many different ethnicities and cultures. And so, for example, my parents and oldest brother immigrated from India, but my younger brother is from Chicago and I'm from Pennsylvania. So I'd like to have each of the panelists share a little bit about their heritage. David, can you start us off?
Maybe I'll mute before I can share anything. Good afternoon and good evening. Thanks so much for the question and just the opportunity to engage in some important conversation with the people who are API identified or allies of our community. So I identify myself first as an immigrant. I immigrated here from 1971 from Vietnam, and just right after the fall of Saigon in 1975. And so that is me. I'm the oldest of two, and I was raised by a single mom. And I feel like we live in a bicultural kind of environment in my upbringing where I was raised. There were not a lot of AAPI people within our community, very different than where I'm living now, which is in Los Angeles, Southern California area. So that's just a little bit about me.
Thank you for sharing. Makoto, what about you?
Hi, everyone. Good evening. How are you? My name is Makoto, and I am from Tokyo in Japan. Well, that's where I was born, and I was raised there. When I was about 25 years old, I moved to America, and I first lived in Washington, D.C. I lived there for about 45 years, and then I moved to Philadelphia, and that was about 8 years, and then I moved to Atlanta, Georgia. So that was, I had 25 years in Japan where I grew up. And then once I moved to America, I've been living here for about 17 years. So, it's almost halfway there. So same as David, I have two different cultures kind of all in one.
Thank you. And Yuli, what about you?
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I am a Filipino American. I was born in Manila, but both of my parents was born in Camarines Sur, one of the provinces of the Bicol Peninsula. It is the southern part of Luzon, which is the largest island in the Philippine archipelago. As some of us know, that the Philippines comprise of about 7,641 islands, in which only about 2,000 are inhabited. And the Philippines was named after King Philip II, since we are under the Spanish regime for 330 years. And then we got saved by the United States at some point, and we're under the United States rule for 48 years.
Thank you. So for our second question, Makoto, why do you think it's so important to celebrate Api Heritage Month?
Well, let me see. I'm still learning. I'm still learning about Japanese culture. And, that's where I was born and that's where I grew up. But I'm trying to get the opportunity to really get more in depth with Japanese culture. I didn't really get that opportunity until I moved to the US and I was able to see Japan from that outside perspective. So I could see the different cultures here in America as well, and also Japanese culture. And there's so much going on in America as well, with such a diverse community. And in Japan, I only had that really one culture to experience. So it's important to me to really learn about Japanese culture, while at the same time learning about other countries as well and other people's cultures. So, that way that I can really build a foundational relationship and, wellness within the different cultures and with other people with different backgrounds.
Such an important thing to do. Yuli, what about you? Why do you think it's important to celebrate Api Heritage Month?
Yeah, well, I think just to remind our fellow American, whatever the Asian, American contributed to the country. As with the United States and the Philippines, we go a long ways. We can start from World War II, in which half of the Filipino American in California enlisted for the army, and then they ended up actually going back to the Philippines and save the Filipinos from the Japanese regime.
That's an important thing to note. There's just so many contributions in history that we don't know about that we need to highlight so we can teach them more to people who are growing up and adults who didn't learn it as kids. David, how about you?
Sure. Thank you so much for the question. I think it's a time to celebrate and honor the various cultures within our community. As you know, there's thousands of languages and dialect within the community. So although many people may assume that we are similar just because we may have shared some outside features, I think it's important, and it's also a reminder of our community is thriving, growing leaps and bounds, and it's really part of the ecosystem that includes economic, social, and political view. And what I find interesting about not just learning about the population trend and the growth in some of the pockets of the United States is how many years it has been since we talk about this community, and just a little bit of, not to give you the whole history of AAPI Heritage Month, but I'm surprised and also really enlightened and pleased that this whole movement actually started in the 70s and 80s, and there was like so many anecdotal stories that I read up on. It actually might be the reason why we even have AAPI Heritage Month altogether. It was from a female way back in the whole 70s and 80s, and I can share you with some links because I think that is really an opportunity to remember and celebrate those people that were trailblazers. But then for this today of 2021 and reflecting back in the year of just being in quarantine and public health crisis, is like in the midst of all of that, this is also an important moment where we take this month, just like any other day, is to see where we can find opportunities to even do more, to do better, and to actually elevate our voices and really amplify them and actually call and actually want to demand social justice, and also an opportunity to engage in dialogue that are difficult, and that includes racism. So it's not, racism is pervasive. It's not just any particular racial ethnic group. So I think capitalizing on this month to really punctuate on the need to have that continued dialogue, just like those trailblazers in the 70s and 80s. I think that's an important reminder.
And that's such a good point, kind of that concept of affecting positive social change. And as Walden grads, you know a lot about that. And that's, rooted in Walden's history and mission, as well as the curriculum. So although it's been slow, we're starting to see more cultural representation in TV, movies, and advertising. So, Yuli, what kind of impact do you think that this has?
Well, I think, well, it's about time for us to be represented in the media, to have some role model, and we have to remember that television's widespread influence can reduce social inequity and should be exploited. And it could explain the divide, and we could actually help out and ease the misinformation that's going on at this point, gaslighting, what's going on at this point, that actually even making the divide of Americans wider. And it just like the 2003 research of Fraser et al. That stated that possible remedy to America's equity problem to take advantage of the powerful role of the television media that could play in both creating and erasing racial and social inequity.
That's a really good point. David, what do you think?
Tell me the question again to make sure I'm answering it thoroughly.
So, we're starting to see more cultural representation in TV, movies, and advertising. So what kind of impact do you think that has?
Yes, I think every little bit helps. Visibility is important, but also in addition to visibility is really couched what we see and what has been representative for our collective community is actually accurate and representative. What I mean by that is, let's just hypothetically think of a character way in the back that you might have seen that is labeled as Asian in a film or a movie. The way that might be depicted may not be what we all view as typical, quote, typical Asian. I also want to take this opportunity is that I've been doing a lot of speaking engagement on the topic of model minority myth, and also breaking them bamboo ceiling, and also looking at how in the workplace or even outside the workplace, how we can help all of our colleagues and our junior associates to be able to address the need to balance assertiveness and passiveness. So all these things are just helping to continue to work on shaping the message. I think messaging is important, and also not to really default to some perceived stereotypes, and each of us do it in our own community somehow, but we certainly can be helped by celebrities alike, and also other people that make a contribution to our community.
I totally agree. And I think that's something that, when you look at TVs and movies, that needs to be worked on, that authentic representation of the different Asian cultures versus that stereotypical kind of character that we're used to seeing in TV and movies. Makoto, what about you?
Yeah, so the more and more visibility that I see with different Asian leaders and different professions, it does make me feel quite inspired. I feel like my self-esteem is definitely increased when I see that. And, I think I'm willing to trust it and trust myself more in general, but also, hold on one moment. But when I see other people, other Asian people, and I see other leaders and other people and other characters in, high esteem, it makes me feel a lot better. And when I, think about it and I'm trying to learn about their other countries and, who all these people from different Asian countries, I want to know more about them. And it helps me, become a leader in my field. And the more that we see that type of representation, we can see Asian people that have families and that are happy and they have dreams and goals. And that's something that's really important for me in my future.
That's such a good point. I think about it from, an Asian woman perspective, and how important cultural representation can be to young girls growing up. And, girls go through so much trying to fit in. And unfortunately, we're often judged by how we look. And, it kind of reminds me of the impact that Mindi Kaling's show, Never Have I Ever on Netflix, has had on, Asian American teenagers and their experiences. And, this TV show constantly addresses how the main character identifies with her Indian culture. And in one particular episode, she attends an Indian cultural event and thinks about how she never felt so out of place. And it resonated so much for me in the most painful way possible, because I remember my parents bringing me to those Asian events. And I remember feeling the same way, refusing to participate, wearing American clothing instead of Indian clothing, because I grew up in a largely white community and had mostly white friends. And I had been picked on for being Indian. So I tried my best to assimilate, which is obviously not a good thing, right? You want to embrace your heritage and your culture. And, you have a new generation of kids looking at and watching these TV shows and thinking, wow, there's that great role model. And there's that person who's confident in their identity and they're not going to let racism win. And they're going to be proud to be who they are. So like all of you said, it's not just about having Asians represented, but it's also exploring their experiences and their cultures and being as accurate as possible and not having those stereotypes. Which kind of leads me into my next question. We're talking about racism and bias and the impact that it can have. Asians have faced a dramatic spike in violence throughout the pandemic, and there have been more than 6,600 hate incidents in the US just from March 2020 to 2021 alone. And leaders actually say the number is much higher, as many hate crimes can go unreported. David, how can we come together to stop Asian hate?
Yeah, sure. I think there's things that we can do individually and there's things that we can do collectively as a group. And something that I would suggest is to really understand the history of Asian discriminations and even hatred. So it's not a current phenomenon. So that's really helped me to understand that this is not something new. It's just that happened coincidentally, good or bad, with the coronavirus pandemic, that there's a story attached to that we can talk about. One is to also spread awareness on social media about anything that is racially motivated attacks and that affects our community. And I would say, if you are courageous enough, report hate crimes and harassment. There's organizations that you actually can report those hate crimes and so on. And this is a fine balance, because I have friends of all different colors, if you will. And sometimes I always have to challenge myself when I'm talking and advocating for anti-Asian hate crime. I'm not excluding other groups. It doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. So I think it's like making sure you recognize that it's okay that you can support your, let's say, Black friends who are advocating and being activists about anti-Black hatred and racism. I can do the same, and we can do it together. So that's another way to think about that. If you are politically active, there's a lot of policies and bills and that you can be part of, or just merely donate for those causes that are reputable. And I think it's also important to speak up and speak out, like what we're doing now. And if you are an ally, or even if you just like, I think checking in on your friends are important, because maybe everyone is affected differently. For example, a lot of the hate crimes have been reported and afflicted with our elderly seniors population, because for obvious reason, they're not able to really care. So I think checking in on them and make sure you can provide some sort of, not just the physical support, but social, emotional support goes a long way. Because when someone has been traumatized, it's important to think about, like, just post-traumatic stress disorder, what someone may go through. That level of support is important. Let me see what else. Bring it up at work, because I belong to and lead, our Asian Pacific American employee resource group. There's a lot of topics that we talk about, listening sessions, facilitating that, sharing the stories. There's different forums, there's different ways to do that. But I think find what is comfortable. And the last thing I add is I recently attended the bystander training. In that class, I remember there's this acronym called 5 Ds of bystander intervention. So there's things that you can do when you observe something. What do you do? Do you want to, diminish that whole thing? So I don't want to go into all that detail, but receiving training on how to intervene, how to act, how to react, I think that will be good, because the more you arm and more informed you are, the better that you can kind of, or you just are giving more options to be able to influence and impact or making a positive influence to the topic of racism and hatred.
Absolutely, and taking action is just, the first and foremost thing that we can all do to, come together and stop Asian hate. Yuli, what about you? Do you have any recommendations?
Well, first of all, I agree with David that Asian hatred is not new. We could go back way back in 1924 with the Exclusion Act, on which Chinese immigrants are not allowed to be naturalized to be an American citizen. We could go back to what happened in Detroit, in which a Chinese person was mistakenly to be Japanese, because at that time the car makers state, which is Detroit, is blaming economy, the downfall of the car making economy, because of the Japanese made cars. But the thing is, the question is, what flicked the switch of hatred, right? And what happened? So for me, what flicked the switch is the gaslighting that happened the past years, confusing others about reality. So my recommendation is we should find a commonality, not to hate others, but hate poverty, hate inequality. We need to reconceptualize ourselves and tell our kids just to be themselves, to be always to treat others nicely, and to be honest and always tell the truth, that and what they feel, that they're part of the society too. Even they have the wrong color, as they said, with what we call in social science othering, because we don't belong to them, because we don't have the right kind of skin. But we always just have to try hard to be the model minority. We're still the minority in our country.
And you and David bring up good points, especially just from that, like, the gaslighting perspective. It's whether you don't fit that typical, perception that I have of you or your community, or David, like you said, that there's other ethnicities going through their own struggles with racism and bias, and how often, both all these different sections are gaslighted against each other, when we should be working together to combat racism and bias, because it truly does take that group effort. Makoto, what about you?
So, we've been trying to fight against the Asian hate and racism that has been systemic in this country, and fighting for my culture. And I've been pretty quiet about it for a while. When I was living in Japan, I got pretty quiet about it. But when I moved to America, I didn't really understand my rights completely. My perspectives and my cultural customs did not exactly match up with everyone. I was a little bit more passive, which I realized was a little bit negative in America. I didn't really know how to speak up for myself when I got here. So I started learning a little bit more about American culture, over the years. And I believed, that American culture and some other countries, their cultures were similar, and with their ways of respecting other people, because that didn't make sense to me when I first got here. And respect can be, a way to speak up, but it has to be balanced. And that was a big challenge for me. And I also think we need to really, get introspective and look at ourselves and look at our own biases and our own prejudices and judgments against other people. And I have to admit, I had some negativities or some negative opinions about other Asians, but then I saw more and more media and more role models and leaders in different professions. And that did help me kind of regain that self-esteem that I was lacking there, and I could accept these other cultures and therefore accepting myself. Because sometimes that hate can come from within. So encouraging ourselves and being trusting and proud of each other and other Asians is, a great way to kind of dissolve that hate. We just have to love each other.
That's such a good point. And it just a really honest aspect to it all, right? That we all have biases, and it's not something that, you learn about it and then it's fixed, right? It's something that we have to continually work on, continually address, and continually learn about. And as we do that, we start to see progress and change throughout everything that we do, and especially within ourselves. And so, that's an interesting question when you're thinking about, racism isn't new, right? Bias isn't new. It's continuing and it has been here for a long time. So, Yuli, how do you think education plays a role in combating systemic racism?
Well, for me, it's education will plays a very important role in combating systemic racism, because as a Walden University alumni, we're scholars of social change, right? And once we're done with our programs, and then we move on and do our way to make a difference out there, and be a good role model for others, and do something good for others, not only to people that belongs to not only that belongs to you or your own race, but to other people, the people of the United States of America, right? As an epidemiologist, we don't look at with the color of the skin. We assess what we need to do in order to combat and flatten the curve of this pandemic. We don't care who you are. We don't ask your name. We're colorblind, and then I think in a way, in my field, I'm making a good example to my peers and to others who would like to continue their education in public health.
That's a great example. Yuli, I think of you, you're this epidemiologist, but you're also a Filipino epidemiologist, right? And you don't know who you're inspiring to become and go into that role and get that degree and do the work that you're doing. But then at the same time, you're using your degree to affect positive social change. And you can take a look at the inequities in healthcare and see how that the COVID-19 pandemic is disproportionately affecting the Navajo Nation. And that's the work that you're focusing on and trying to see how you can balance out that inequity and help create change there.
Yes.
Makoto, how about you? How do you think education plays a role in combating systemic racism?
Yes, so education, of course, is very important. My family, my parents emphasized education throughout my whole upbringing. I was born deaf, and both of my parents are hearing. And it was a little tough with my education. I was trying to remember that, it's important to remember that every child does not have access to education, maybe for reasons of disability or poverty, social economic class. There's many other variables that could be in part of this. And I was extremely lucky. I had support and access to education growing up. And it helped me really open my mind to this world and understand what was going on better. And education is also very important because it helps people get out of their comfort zones, and to really apply and know how to apply their knowledge and help other people. And if you're in the same area within the same group forever and just continuously regurgitate those types of information to each other, it's not going to work out. You need to have education and opportunities for other people to interact with each other. So don't maybe have access to education. It's important to do that kind of outreach and really lift up the voices that we don't hear.
That's really important, and you can use your education to spread that knowledge and share it. David, how about you?
Sure. I just wanted to celebrate and commend Makoto for his educational achievement, despite all the challenges and all the other things that you have to work around that other people do not. So I just think you are just someone I definitely admire. So thanks so much for just speaking on education, knowing you're not able to share the same learning experiences as most of us do. So I feel like the role of education, when I think about social topics, the role of education is critically important. And I think that is one of the best ways to stop the proliferation of racism and discrimination. I think that education also has a central role of really creating values and attitudes and really shape that message. And it really touches on important topics that is sometimes hard to have one-on-one conversation with. I would say education is not just about us educating ourselves, but if you are a parent, or you have children, or whatever various, education should be lifelong, first of all, but you want to instill that education as early as you can, because how you behave to one another, how you interact with one another of different races or ethnic groups, your children actually see you. So I think it needs to be instilled very early. And I also feel like there's tangible, concrete training that all of us can do when we talk about discrimination and racism and prejudices, like unbiased bias, for example, unconscious bias, or inclusion and diversity training. I think there's so many aspects of education. Being aware of historical is great, but learn about what is being worked on at different levels, at the national, federal, all the way to your local community. Understand where are the gaps, because many of us have advanced training and learning. We are always looking for, so what are the opportunities and what has not been discussed, and bring that to light. I think those are all important. So education is important, but quality education is even more important. So you want to always be informed and well-informed. You always want to challenge the sources and resources that you're receiving your training and education from, because you can actually go online and there are many different perspectives. So you want to make sure you are informed, well aware of what is really going around, and challenge your own perspectives. I think that's important. But yeah, I think that's a very good start.
David, I like how you brought up how it starts early. I actually learned from another Walden professor who does research on implicit bias, and she was telling me how children as young as 3 start to pick up on implicit biases. And that just kind of blew my mind to know that at such an early age, you are already seeing what's in the world or what your family or your parents are doing, and that's reflecting in your behaviors and your thoughts and attitudes. So it's a really important thing to address. At this time, I want to make sure that we're leaving some time to answer some audience questions. And one of the first questions that we have is actually, how has racism impacted you? Makoto, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I was born deaf. So, some of my challenges came from disability more than racism. I have to be honest about that. But my experience with racism did not really impact me. And I was more fighting for my rights as a deaf person. For example, getting access, interpreters, whatnot, politically. Which president should I vote for? I mean, I didn't really have access to that kind of information. It was quite limited. And then also when the COVID-19 spread, the information that was available, they almost never had interpreters. Sometimes they had captions. But there were, the automated captions were not too great. So it was really frustrating, unfortunate. It's kind of an unfortunate experience. Because what happened as a result of that is my Asian identity kind of fell to the wayside. But getting more involved with this and experiencing some of these recent happenings, I felt more connected to it. But without access, it kind of falls down in my priorities of my identity. And my internet connected to intersectionality, you know, all Asian people do not have the same experience, of course. And we can't make assumptions that we're all the same. So listening to other people's experiences has, you know, helped me be able to support them. And it's been really important for me and my own Asian identity.
That's a really interesting point about that multi-layered, like, you know, everyone's not just one thing, right? You know, I'm a woman, I'm a person of color, I have disabilities. And to your point, it's like, which one do I address first and how do we tackle all of it? And sometimes it can be overwhelming to really navigate that. David, what about you?
I want to expand on what Makoto shared, and he used the word intersectionality, and I was going to use that as well. I'm going to be really open and honest with you guys. It really, when this whole topic of Asian hate and discrimination just recently brought out to the forefront, it really made me reflect back on my upbringing, my own personal experiences of being bullied, of being, you know, this and that or another. I also identify as a part of the LGBTQ community. So that also helped me to really think about how many different angles am I being, quote, discriminated against, and what people might prejudge me with, or just when I said I was an immigrant, that, you know, growing up, I didn't have the right clothing or the this or that, physically and just socially awkward and all that stuff. But it really just wanted to, I turned things in a positive light. I'm 50 years old, so now I approach things very differently than what I used to, how I used to approach things previously. Is I want to turn this kind of negativity and all of my own not so great experiences, something more positive. How can I turn this outwardly? And by doing that is maybe be more empathetic to other people that have gone through the same journey or similar journey. But how do I empower others to take action? How do I kind of serve as a leader or a model to any group that I'm in? It doesn't have to be fancy forum. It just literally be just a small group of people. When I even talk like one-on-one and there's some sort of like disconnect between values, I take the opportunity to share my opinions. I'm not going to change someone's point of view, but I am going to stand up. I think someone mentioned that, you know, there's our own Asian culture sometimes doesn't allow our voice to be as loudly heard as other majority populations. So I'm gonna make myself louder, be more courageous, own what I have, all of the intersectionality and all the different perspectives that I have, and I think I turn that around to not bring me down, but to find an opportunity. It's like I use it as an opportunity now. So I think I was long-winded, but it's important to share your opinions and feelings and turn that around to something positive.
And, you know, that's so true. You know, again, I think it might be some similar experiences there with, you know, Asian upbringings where, you know, I was taught that, you know, you follow the rules, you do the hard work and everything will be okay. And obviously that's not the case, right? You know, we hope that it is, but racism bias can impact that. And I'll never forget, you know, when my first experiences with it in the workplace and how defeated I felt and being afraid to tell my father about that because thinking, oh God, he's going to think that I'm just not trying hard enough or whatever. And when I share that experience with him, his very first gut reaction to that was, well, you need to report it and you need to tell the following people. You need to start listing out like, you need to call these people and you need to call a lawyer. I'm like, whoa, we just went from 0 to 60. But he was trying to tell me that like, you should never, ever put up with that. And you should always speak up and you should always defend yourself and defend others who are going through it. Whether it's racism, bias, microaggressions, that it's not going to change if we don't call it out and then try to take action to make it better. Yuli, what about you?
For me, my experience with the racism is I could trace it back when I was still in the Philippines. You know, in the Philippines, you could be judged based just on the tone of your on the shades of your skin tone. You know, if you have if your skin tone is darker than anyone, you could get teased, and they make fun of you, and that's what actually first impacted me when I was growing up. But that made me strong too. So what I did is I just work hard, and I work hard in school, and make the best out of it. And at some point, the teasing stopped, um, and make bullying stop. Well, in a way, in my case, I have four other brothers, so bullying is not a problem. But I have to always work hard so that I won't be teased because I have a darker skin, and that actually helped me out when I migrated here in the U.S. When I migrated in the U.S., I'm already stronger. I know we're diverse. We have we have different cultures and surround diversity within a community. Microaggression exists, but then with that strength that I developed growing up, it helped me out here when I migrated from the U.S.
And that's important that, it's not about letting it, get you down and staying down, that you have to, keep pushing forward, keep trying and keep fighting and keep doing what you do best and what you're passionate about, and not letting that interfere with who you are and who you want to be. Another question that we have from the audience is, this is a fun one. What is your favorite holiday in your culture that might be lesser known in America? David, do you want to go first?
God, you're testing me. My knowledge of my own culture is the part that most people don't know about, is the hard part of the question. I think most people know this, but I guess I think I mentioned this. I did like presentation today. Forgive me if I already shared this already. Of course, Tet or TET is the Lunar New Year in our own Vietnamese culture. But I would say something in the spirit of this topic is April 30th, 1975. In my family, we always remember that date. If you are a history buff, you probably know what I'm going to say, is when we lost our country to communism. So it's a time or a date that we, it's not mourn, I guess mourn might be a good word for it, is my grandparents and their, when you lose your country and you have to immigrate and leave your country because you don't, like you're being forced to almost, that has been very traumatic. So I know in my own family, we always post something on Facebook to say, don't forget or remember the fall of Saigon on April 30th, 1975. And that's when most of my family have already left right before that date. And I'm sure a lot of, anecdotal stories, and even a Broadway show of Miss Saigon has really, dramatized that whole event. So I think that's something I wanted to share.
That's a really good example. I think that all cultures kind of have that different date, or that we kind of celebrate within our own cultures, even if it's not a formalized holiday. What sticks out for me is like July 4th in America, and they're like Independence Day. But then I also have India, and I think about how that's a completely different month for us, because our independence didn't come until the 1940s. And it's such that weird dynamic when you think about that. And when you see the different posts and people will correct me and say, no, that's July 4th. I'm like, for America. That's a different day. Yuli, what about you?
Oh, this is going to be a hard question, because Philippines is we're a Christian country, and we're under the U.S. for several years. So what we celebrate here in the U.S., we celebrate it too in the Philippines. But what makes let me just say, the celebrating Christmas in the Philippines is what make it unique, is that we celebrate Christmas for 4 months. actually. And also, of course, we have food that we serve on Christmas Day, and also New Year's Day, that actually is served in order to have longevity for long life, which is actually it's what I think that Chinese share this too, as serving noodles during Christmas or New Year's Eve. That's what, yeah, it's, yeah. I don't think we have a unique holiday that anyone knows. That Philippines, it's always what we do here in the U.S. We do it there too. So,
But it's important to know the different nuances you have and how you celebrate too.
Yeah.
Makoto, what about you?
Okay, in Japan, every year, September 20th, it's called Respect for the Elders Day. So, it's celebrating our grandparents, our grandmas, grandpas, and the grandchildren, are a big part of it. And we just listen to stories from back in World War II. We have really great food. They talked about the lack of food that they had, the economy, and how that changed and how it then later developed. So every year we sit around and we just learn about Japanese culture from multiple generations, grandparents. And then when I moved to America, I still really enjoy listening to elders, not only Japanese people, but just any seniors or older people in general, learning about their school and their experience and their history. So I really love September 23rd. That's one of the days that I really enjoy working with older folks and gaining some of their wisdom, getting some more experience, and having the opportunity to learn from them. Not just from a book. I can learn it straight from a live person and their real experience. So that's very important to me. I cherish that. It's really important to remember, culture deeply ingrained within the people and learning it straight from them, and that honest culture that comes from the people. So that's all.
That's really important. Kind of makes me think about a holiday in my culture that kind of celebrates that family relationship, except it's called Raksha Bandhan, but it's actually celebrating the relationship between siblings. And I think this was much to my brother's dismay. I have two older brothers. You celebrate this holiday by buying or creating these kind of decorative twine bracelets. And so, and then you can customize them with details that you think reflects that person, right? Like maybe I get one that's red because that's my oldest brother's favorite color or something of that nature. And because my brothers grew up in America, boys are taught like, oh, you don't wear jewelry. And of course I'm a girl, so I would buy them like 30 bracelets and I'd be like, I want you to wear all 30 every single day. And they would just be like, great, now we got to wear this, Whereas with me, that was a big deal, but I loved celebrating that in India because it wasn't just siblings, it was cousins, and so much thought went into that. And there was so much cultural aspects to creating those bracelets. Another question that we have is, outside of your family, what Asian or Pacific Islander has been a role model for you? Makoto, do you want to go first?
Okay, honestly, that was one of the toughest questions that I saw for me to answer. So I was thinking about it, like each year, there's not that many Asian representation or Asian people represented that are particularly announced. And I'm trying to think of famous people and people that inspire me. And I did a little bit of research, and someone who really inspires me, his name is Ichiro Suzuki. He's a Japanese baseball player. who plays in America. He's played in America for many years and gotten many awards. And he's really inspiring to me. I mean, when I was a kid, I remember when I moved, I didn't really expect that I was going to move to America when I was a kid. But when I eventually did move to America, it was really tough. I had a lot of obstacles in my life, but I always remember seeing him, and he was successful and he looked like me. And he was one of the role models that I really hope to see more of, and more within Asian leaders in different fields.
That's a good one. David, what about you?
This is also a difficult question for me because I compartmentalize certain people I admire who is identified as AAPI. For example, when we think of a politician, you gotta take this moment to acknowledge Vice President Kamala Harris, for example, but there's certainly other politicians that are AAPI as well. I can name all of them. Like I love when I hear I hate that I don't remember her name, but it's the senator from Hawaii. That's another person. There's also Primayi Jajapal. I'm not sure, but it's another politician. So those are different people. It's also like I still play music. You know, I'm classically trained, so there's certain pianists that are female. Japanese pianist, oh my gosh, Makoto will kill me, but let me just think of the name. She's a little bit older now, but she's a well-known pianist. I have to remember, but I listen to YouTube all the time. So those are some people. As far as flutists, I play the flute. Oh my gosh, Jasmine Choi. I mean, I'm sorry, you put me on the spot, but there are people in different genre or different areas of my life that I was like, oh, I can identify with that. There's people who are newscaster like Lucy Liu and other people who I admire for what they do and they speak confidently. I think that's important. And I'll leave this one last thing because it's true, but it's kind of funny. I'm a consultant, so pre-COVID, I literally travel almost every week, and I would go to different locations and cities and states, and a lot of time airports, and people from far away always assume I look like the actor B.D. Wong. So sometimes from far away. So that's just an anecdotal thing. I actually met him because he wrote a book when I was living in Boston. So I met him in Boston and said, oh yeah, from far away, I do look or have some resemblance of B.D. Wong. But oh, thank you. Someone just Marie Hizono from Hawaii. Thank you so much. So those are some people I won't say admire because that's such a strong word, but identify with, and I appreciate the work that they do and the contribution for their respective fields that they they have for their passions in life.
That's a good point that, we have so many in so many different fields, and that it's important to actually have that, right? Because it can motivate you based on your passions or based on policy. Just there's so many different avenues, and it's great to know that we have that variety that we can look up to and have that influence us. Yuli, what about you?
Oh, yeah. Well, if in the future I'm going to look back at what I'm doing today, well, I've been working with a lot of strong women leaders in helping to flatten the curve of the pandemic. But if I'm going to choose a Pacific Islander that could be a good role model for my daughter, it could going to be Patsy Matsu Takemoto Mink. She was the first woman of color and the first Asian American woman elected to Congress. And she's also the first woman elected to Congress from the state of Hawaii, and she served a total of 12 terms, split between 1965 to 77, representing Hawaii's at large and second congressional district from 1990 to 2002. So it's Patsy Mink.
That's a new one. I'm glad that you shared that so we can learn from that. Mine, I would have to say is, and this is probably going to age myself, Aishwarya Rai. She's a famous Bollywood actress, and it's funny, my mom did everything she could to really get me to learn about her, but a lot of it was surrounded because she was kind of that first famous South Asian that broke that American barrier, right? That she kind of entered American pop culture, and that you could find dolls that look like her. And those were dolls that I could play with, and that I could see that role model of someone who went to school, went to college, who was independent and really brilliant and talented in her career. And she wanted that for me growing up so that I had something to kind of role model myself after. We have another great question from an audience member. How can we respectfully address our biased elders? I'm going to ask Makoto first, since you actually talked about the influence of our elders.
Oh, okay, let me see. So you mean like our own parents, or do you mean in general?
It just says address biased elders. So I'm going to assume in general, maybe even parents too, if you want to address that.
So my father used to work in Japan, and he would fly back and forth. And he had a lot of experience traveling and meeting other people, and for business in America and whatnot in the Middle East. So my mom's family and my parents were pretty open-minded. Sometimes I've noticed other older folks are a little bit more close-minded. And how can we respectfully address that? I think they are closed-minded. Some people are closed-minded, but sometimes they're also able to teach me. And I've learned values and beliefs, from that time period that the elders might have grown up in. And of course, it might not match what we see in modern times and our modern values, but it's okay. And it's okay to have, a range of values that are different from younger people and older generations. The generations, our politics and our philosophies change. And sometimes people are just kind of stuck in their ways. I think we need to remember to keep an open mind with them, be honest and listen. If your grandma, grandpa, parents even, whatever they're saying, just listen to them and be able to support them. And sometimes for younger generations, we can take what we can from them, but also develop our own set of values and, talk within our own selves. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think you make a strong point there. David, what about you?
Sure. I'm hoping I'm answering the question correctly. How do I address elder bias? Well, bias, I don't think it will be just confined to elders. If I'm biased, I may be biased other things. But if you are talking about whether I appreciate elderly people, I find wisdom in them. I find experience. These things you cannot take away, just like education. When you get your degree, no one is going to ever take that away from you. So I think appreciating what they have learned, appreciating their perspectives, appreciate the wisdom. And I think what Makoto was saying too, if I can assume and presume, is that you want to also be able to freely weave in how you have evolved, how the time has evolved, and what part of those stories that you want to extract from. Just like I were to be talking to anyone, it's not even about age. This is not about age. It's I can be informed in many different ways, and it's ultimately up to me what aspect of it that I can learn from anyone, regardless of age. But I think respect in our culture is important. So I think all of us should be respectful of their longevity in their life experience, and then take what you can take out of it, but certainly don't impose something on anyone else, regardless of their age.
That's a great point. And Yuli, what about you?
Oh, well, it's like what David said. It's for Asian, respect is very, very important. with regard with the elders, especially with my folks, I don't have a problem with my dad, but my mom is a very strong lady, and sometimes, well, you know, unconscious biases, as I would say, that I always have a problem with my mom, and it just I just always remind her about what they always teach us when we're growing up, and to respect others. And I just always remind my mom, hey mom, remember, we need to respect others. Is the reason why me and the rest of my brothers actually was enrolled to martial arts lessons and stuff. It is because to develop respect. And well, I'm sure my mom listened at some point, and sometimes she just ignore it. But well, that's my mom. but but for me, for the elders, I think it's the role of the younger generation to show a good example again, even to the elders. What the elders see to you, and that you're respecting others, that could actually avoid the implicit biases to that usually elder people usually commonly get caught on.
That's a great point. I think about my parents and how they obviously were born and raised in India, but then they spent a good portion of their life living in America. And as a kid, I kind of watched some of their implicit biases disappear because they were introduced to more cultural diversity in America, because it is just such a melting pot. Whereas I can look at my cousins in India who have never left maybe a 20-minute radius of where they grew up. And to them, it's a culture shock. Like, they'll see the photos that I post on Facebook and social media, and they'll be all different cultures. And I'm like, oh my God, like, and it's not a position of necessarily racism or bias, but it's just more of, I've never seen that. And it's almost the same thing I have growing up in Pennsylvania, where I went to a largely white school, had largely white friends. And sometimes I would walk in a room and I would be the only diverse person there, and people would be staring at me. And it wasn't necessarily coming from a place of hate, but rather, I've never seen someone like you. And it's speaking up, and it's educating, and it's, introducing them to that diversity. And I think that's how you combat bias and racism, no matter what age you are. This has been such an insightful discussion. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. Thank you to the audience for all the thoughtful questions and comments, and a huge thank you to our panelists, David, Makoto, and Yuli. I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure the audience did too, about the many vibrant cultures in the Asian community. By sharing our personal experiences and recommendations, we can help put action behind words to educate others on the importance of diversity and to fight for equality. So thank you again to everyone for joining us tonight to help empower the greater good through education, communication, and action. Have a wonderful evening.